Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Mythologist. Tonight we'll wander slowly through a tale as old as time. A story whispered across centuries, echoing through ancient temples and moonlit dreams, the myth of Pandora, and the box she was told never to open. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Are you tucked beneath the stars in a quiet corner of the countryside, or nestled into a cozy bed in a busy city? Wherever you are, I'm so glad you're here. Take a deep breath in and let it go. You don't need to solve anything, you don't need to do anything, just listen and drift. Let us begin our story. Long before humans roamed the earth, before the first whisper of a mortal breath, the world belonged to beings much older, much greater than anything we could imagine. It was a time of gods and titans, of golden light in the sky and deep, endless shadows in the oceans and mountains. The earth was young, not in the way we measure years now, but in feeling. Everything felt newly born. Trees stretched for the heavens like they were trying to touch the stars for the very first time. Rivers carved their paths slowly, as if deciding who they wanted to become. Above it all, high on the peak of Mount Olympus, the gods lived in splendor. They were radiant beings, timeless and powerful. Zeus, with his thunderbolt and unshakable will, ruled over them. Beside him stood Hera, regal and watchful. Athena, goddess of wisdom, and Apollo, god of light and music, brought beauty and thought to the divine world. They dined on nectar, drank ambrosia, and observed the unfolding universe below them like curious artists watching their creation come to life. But even in this celestial peace, there was tension. Deep beneath Olympus, older forces stirred. Titans, the ancient ones who had ruled before the gods. Among them was Prometheus, a figure both admired and feared. He was not like the others. Where many of the immortals were content with power, Prometheus was filled with something different: compassion and curiosity, a longing to understand the creatures that were still being shaped from the earth, wind, and water. You see, in those early days, the gods had begun experimenting with life. They sculpted animals from clay and gave them instincts. Birds were taught to fly, fish to swim, but humans were something else entirely. They were fragile, delicate creatures, not born with claws or wings or thick fur. They had no venom, no armor, no great strength. And yet, Prometheus looked at them with wonder. He saw not their weakness, but their potential. There was a spark in them, something dormant, like fire waiting to be lit. And so, while the gods debated, created, and ruled from their shining halls, Prometheus descended quietly to earth. He watched the humans shiver in the cold, cower from storms, and retreat into the shadows. He listened to their confusion, their need to understand, to build, to survive. And slowly, an idea began to take shape in his mind, one that would change everything. But for now, the gods knew none of this. They looked down at the earth like a painter who has finished his work and stepped back, proud. They had made a world filled with harmony, order, and beauty. It was balanced, peaceful, perhaps too peaceful. For nothing in this world, neither divine nor mortal, stays still forever. And somewhere, hidden in the stillness, the seeds of change were already beginning to grow. Prometheus had always been a curious soul, even among the Titans, those ancient colossal beings who existed before the gods took their thrones. While his kin sought power and control, Prometheus turned his gaze downward, toward the trembling, uncertain lives of the newly formed humans. He watched them through the seasons. When the cold winds blew and the nights stretched endlessly, they huddled together like frightened children, unable to warm themselves or drive away the darkness. When hunger came, they scavenged blindly, unsure how to cook their food, unable to preserve it. They were like newborns, wide-eyed, vulnerable, and utterly alone in a world that did not yet love them. The gods of Olympus, for all their brilliance, did not see these creatures the way Prometheus did. To Zeus, they were a secondary creation, something lesser, a faint shadow of the divine. Humans were meant to worship, to kneel, to obey. They were not meant to question or challenge the order of things. Zeus had deliberately denied them fire. Not just the literal flame, but the metaphorical one as well, the fire of thought, of invention, of transformation. Fire was sacred. It was what separated gods from mortals, wisdom from ignorance, eternity from death. But Prometheus disagreed. In the silence of the night, when Olympus slept and the stars blinked like ancient eyes, he made his decision. He would defy Zeus, not out of pride, not out of rebellion, but out of love, a love for potential, a love for creation that had not yet bloomed. One moonless night, Prometheus climbed the slope of Mount Olympus, stepping lightly over silver clouds, past sleeping gods and glowing halls. In the centre of the heavens, hidden in a golden hearth, was the eternal flame. It burned silently, casting no smoke, only warmth and power. Prometheus approached it slowly, his face lit in orange and gold. He reached into the fire, and it did not burn him. The flame, ancient and alive, seemed to recognize him. Perhaps it too longed to be part of the world below. With trembling hands he placed a single glowing coal into the stalk of a hollow fennel plant. A clever trick. The gods would not notice right away. The flame would be hidden, yet alive. Then, descending the mountainside like a shadow at dawn, Prometheus made his way to the humans. When he arrived, the people stood around him in silence, their eyes wide with awe. They didn't yet know how to speak words, but they felt something, an ancient recognition, a whisper in their bones. And then, with emotion as gentle as a lullaby, Prometheus held out the glowing coal. At first, the people only stared at it. It flickered in the night like a small star fallen to the ground. But as they gathered closer, warmth began to spread across their faces. One child reached out timidly. The flames danced, but did not bite. Soon they fed the coal with dry twigs and leaves. The fire grew, and with it, something shifted. They could now roast meat, warm their shelters, and push back the night. They began to sit together in circles, staring into the flames, not just for heat, but for stories, for comfort. Sparks flew upward like ancient spirits escaping the past. In time, they learned to shape tools, to bend metal, to craft, to create. Fire taught them not just survival, but imagination. Prometheus watched from a distance. He did not ask for thanks. He did not wait for praise. He simply smiled. He had given them not just warmth, but the first real chance to shape their own fate. But in the clouds above, Olympus stirred. Zeus had noticed. The scent of smoke rose into the heavens, not the divine fire of Olympus, but something raw, something mortal. Zeus stood from his throne and peered down at the earth. He saw the fires burning. He saw the humans dancing. He saw something that chilled him to his immortal core. He saw them beginning to change. They were no longer helpless. They were no longer fully dependent. And in this small flame, Zeus saw the flicker of defiance, the potential for disobedience, for rebellion, for choice. The king of gods clenched his jaw. Prometheus had stolen fire from the heavens and handed it to the dirt. And in doing so, he had dared to cross the oldest line, the line between God and man. A punishment would be needed, not just for Prometheus, but for the fragile, flickering beings he had chosen to protect. But that, as with all things, would come in time. For now the fire burned, and in its glow humanity had taken its very first step into the world. Zeus sat upon his golden throne, high above the mortal world, the storm clouds darkening around him like thoughts gathering in his mind. The air on Mount Olympus was usually bright and clear, filled with music and laughter from the gods who lived there. But now it was silent. The fires on earth had not only lit the forests and valleys, they had ignited something far more dangerous: change. Zeus had ruled the heavens since overthrowing his father Cronus. He had defeated the Titans, chained them in the depths of Tartarus, and brought order to a chaotic world. To him, the universe was not a place to be shared, but to be ruled. Every thunderclap, every shift of the wind was his command. He had designed the world so that mortals would live in humility, always looking upward, never daring to reach too high. But Prometheus had changed the script. By stealing fire, Prometheus had not just broken a law, he had introduced the idea that the gods were not untouchable. He had shown humans that power could be shared, that light could be passed from hand to hand without divine permission. The fire itself was just a flicker of heat and flame, but what it represented was far greater. It was knowledge. It was creation. It was the beginning of self-determination. Zeus saw this clearly, and it filled him with a slow, simmering fury. He paced across Olympus, thunder echoing with each step. Lightning crackled at his fingertips. Around him, the gods watched with uneasy silence. They had seen Zeus angry before, furious even, but this was different. This was something colder, more deliberate. Prometheus had to be punished, not just for the theft, but for the idea he had planted like a seed in the human soul. But Zeus knew better than to act in haste. He needed more than revenge. He needed a lesson, a warning, something unforgettable. He would not strike the humans directly, not yet. Instead, he would give them a gift, a beautiful gift, one that would seem divine, radiant, irresistible. He summoned Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship. Hephaestus was a master of the forge, capable of shaping anything from metal or clay. Zeus gave him a quiet order: create a being, one of breathtaking beauty, one who will charm and captivate, but who will carry within her the seeds of sorrow. Hephaestus went to work. From the sacred earth he moulded the shape of a woman. He gave her strong limbs, a graceful form, and a face that could silence storms. Aphrodite, goddess of love, touched her skin with the blush of desire. Athena gave her the skill of weaving, the grace of thought, and the shine of curiosity in her eyes. Hermes, the trickster, placed in her heart the gift of persuasion, of silver-tongued speech and clever wit. She was perfect, too perfect. The gods gathered around her, marvelling at what they had made. She was the first of her kind, a woman sculpted not from evolution, but intention. A being created for a purpose, though she herself would not know it. They named her Pandora, which means all-gifted. For each god had given her something. But there was one more thing she would be given: a box, though in truth it was more like a jar beautifully sealed, carved with ancient runes, glowing faintly with divine energy. It was entrusted to her without explanation, only one warning whispered in her ear: never open it. The command was clear, the reason was not, and that Zeus knew was the beginning of the trap. He sent Pandora down to earth, not alone, but as a bride, offered in marriage to Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept a gift from Zeus. He had sensed that the king of gods would strike back, not with force, but with subtlety. But Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, was not known for foresight. He saw Pandora's beauty, her radiant eyes and enchanting voice, and his heart melted. He accepted her gladly, unaware of what her arrival truly meant. And so Pandora descended to earth like a falling star. The gods watched from Olympus with quiet satisfaction. Zeus, seated again upon his throne, allowed himself a small smile. This was no simple punishment. It was a lesson wrapped in beauty, sealed with charm, and buried in mystery. He had not just responded to Prometheus's defiance. He had set the next part of the story into motion. The humans would now learn that every gift carries a cost, that every light casts a shadow. And Pandora, sweet Pandora, was about to become the most unforgettable gift the world had ever known. In the divine forges of Olympus, where stars were born and mountains could be melted like wax, the great craftsman Hephaestus stood before his glowing hearth. Sparks leapt around him like fireflies, and the rhythmic clang of hammer on bronze echoed through the halls of the gods. But on this day he wasn't shaping a shield or a crown. He was crafting something unlike anything he had ever made. Zeus had given him the order to sculpt a being that would change the fate of humankind. From the purest clay gathered at the edge of the world, Hephaestus began his work. He did not rush. Every curve, every line, every detail was deliberate. The figure he moulded was human in form, but with a grace no mortal could possess. He carved her face with the soft symmetry of a dream, gave her limbs that moved with the gentleness of a breeze, and shaped her eyes to hold the spark of curiosity, like twin reflections of a sky that hadn't yet decided between dawn and twilight. When the figure was complete, still and perfect in its silence, the other gods were summoned. Aphrodite stepped forward first. With a single touch, she adorned the statue with beauty so radiant that flowers seemed to bloom wherever the figure would step. Her skin gleamed with the subtle glow of youth and vitality. Her hair shimmered with golden threads as though the light of sunset had been spun into silk. Next came Athena. The goddess of wisdom and craft gave the figure the knowledge of weaving and the grace of movement. She whispered into her ear the secrets of language, of learning, of listening. Though she would be born into a world of silence and confusion, Athena ensured that the woman would carry within her a hunger to understand and to create. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, gave her a connection to the earth. Wherever she walked, she would feel the pulse of the soil beneath her feet. She would know the difference between what nourishes and what poisons, what grows and what withers. Hermes approached with a sly smile. He gave her a voice, clear and persuasive, and a tongue wrapped in charm. He gave her laughter and curiosity, the kind that flutters in the chest like a caged bird. And perhaps, though he didn't say it aloud, he gave her just a drop of mischief. Lastly, Zeus himself gave her a name, Pandora, meaning all gifted, for she had been blessed by each of the gods, graced with beauty, wit, grace, and charm. But he also gave her something more, something that none of the others fully understood. He gave her a small box. It was exquisitely made, sealed tightly with divine markings that no mortal hand could open by force. It was a wedding gift, he said, a symbol of divine favour. But his voice was calm, too calm, and in his eyes flickered a glint that did not reach his smile. He told Pandora only one thing: this box must never be opened. No explanation, no reason, just a command, soft and final, like the closing of a door. Pandora held the box in her hands. It was light, too light perhaps, almost like it was hollow. Yet something inside it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat buried beneath stone. It was beautiful, too beautiful. The kind of beauty that invites questions, the kind that haunts dreams. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence of the gods around her said everything. With the ceremony complete, the gods breathed life into her. One moment, she was still, a sculpture, a perfect form. The next, her chest rose with breath, her eyes blinked slowly, and she looked at the world as if she were seeing it for the first time. Her gaze moved from god to god, unafraid, unsure, and utterly alive. There was something miraculous in that moment. Even the gods who had seen universes born and crushed paused in wonder. Pandora was not a goddess. She was not a titan. She was something entirely new, made by the gods, but destined to walk among mortals. Zeus smiled, but it was the smile of a chess player who has moved the critical piece into place. He presented Pandora to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, as a bride. Though Prometheus had warned him, had begged him, not to accept any gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus could not resist. Pandora's presence was like spring after endless winter. Her voice soothed, her laughter melted caution, and her eyes shone with a quiet hunger for knowledge that he mistook for innocence. The wedding was simple. There was no grand feast, no ceremony in Olympus, just a mortal and a divine creation, joined together in a union wrapped in mystery. The box came with them, of course. It was placed on a high shelf in their home, always in view, always untouched. And yet it became the unspoken centre of everything. Pandora would glance at it when Epimetheus wasn't looking. She would dust around it, arrange flowers near it, pretend it didn't matter. But it sat there quietly, glowing faintly, pulsing softly, like it was waiting for something. She would often sit near it, alone, feeling its presence. There was no sound, no movement, but it filled the room all the same. It was a riddle without a question, promise without words, and in the stillness of those early days, as she tried to be the perfect wife, to tend to the home, to please the man she had only just met, the box became something more than a gift. It became a thought, a whisper, a feeling she couldn't name. She did not yet know what was inside it, nor did she yet understand the role she was meant to play. But the story had begun, and the box was no longer just a box. It was destiny, sealed and silent. For now. The days passed gently, one folding into the next like the soft turning of pages in an ancient book. Pandora's life with Epimetheus was calm and quiet. Their home was modest, nestled between green hills and wildflower meadows, where the sky changed colour with each passing hour. The world was still new, fresh with the scent of creation, and everything around them, birds, trees, rivers, seemed to hum with a subtle energy, as if still singing the notes of the gods who had formed them. Epimetheus adored Pandora. He would watch her as she walked through the fields, her fingers brushing against the tall grasses, her gaze drawn toward every flower, every ripple of water, every flicker of movement in the trees. She was full of questions about the stars, about the winds, about why the sun sank at night and rose again each morning. He tried to answer, but often he couldn't. He wasn't Prometheus, after all. He wasn't a thinker or a planner. His name meant afterthought, and it suited him well. He lived in the moment, le moment, with little concern for what might come next. But Pandora, she was different. She was endlessly curious, and the world around her was like a puzzle that whispered to be solved. She listened to the songs of birds not just for pleasure, but for meaning. She watched the animals and wondered why they behaved the way they did. Sometimes she would sit for hours by the stream, dipping her fingers in the water, eyes unfocused, lost in thoughts she could not yet explain. And always, behind her, not far from reach, sat the box. It had been placed on a wooden shelf in the corner of their home. It was not large, but it demanded attention. Crafted of an unfamiliar material that shimmered subtly in the light, it seemed to glow with its own quiet life. The carvings on its surface were in a language she did not know, and yet they felt familiar, as if they had been etched into her very soul before she was born. She tried at first to ignore it. She cooked, she cleaned, she spoke kindly to Epimetheus, she wandered through the forests and picked herbs and flowers. She did everything she believed a good wife should do, but the box was always there, silent and still, like a single word stuck in her throat. Sometimes she would dream about it. In those dreams, the box would open on its own, and light would pour out of it. Not just light, but feelings, images, sounds she couldn't describe. She would awaken with her heart racing, uncertain whether what she had seen was beautiful or terrifying. Epimetheus noticed the way she stared at it sometimes, how her gaze lingered just a little too long. Once he asked, "Are you all right, Pandora?" She smiled and nodded, but her eyes flicked toward the box again. He didn't press her. He trusted her, and perhaps he too was curious, but fearfully so. He had not been given the box. It had been given to her, and perhaps deep down he sensed that this was not his mystery to unravel, and so the box remained closed. But it changed everything. Pandora began to feel it as a presence, not just an object, but a weight in the room, in her mind. It seemed to radiate something invisible, a tension that brushed against her skins whenever she walked near it. At times it felt warm, almost inviting, at other times cold and distant, as though warning her away. She would ask herself quietly, why? Why must it remain closed? What was so dangerous that it had to be locked away? And if it was so dangerous, why give it to her at all? There were no answers, only the memory of that one instruction given by the gods without explanation. Never open it. That was the real problem, not the box itself, but the mystery surrounding it. A mystery placed in the hands of the most curious being the gods had ever made. And the days continued. Pandora found herself returning to the box more and more often. Not to open it, not yet, but to touch it, to trace the symbols carved into its surface, to feel the faint vibrations of something within it, shifting perhaps, or waiting. She began to talk to it in whispers, not with words she understood, but with half-thoughts and feelings, as though the box were listening. At night, she would lie awake, wondering. She would listen to the wind through the trees and imagine it was speaking to her, urging her onward. Sometimes the sound of rustling leaves felt like a question. What are you waiting for? And still she didn't open it. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid. Afraid of what it might contain and what it might change. Yet the fear didn't stop the longing, it only deepened it. This was the gift that Zeus had chosen for her. A gift that came with no instructions except one. A gift she hadn't asked for. A gift she couldn't forget. It was a beautiful prison, and she was both its guardian and its captive. And though the world outside remained green and peaceful, inside the home, inside her, a quiet storm had begun to stir. Not of rage or destruction, but of unrelenting wonder. The box was waiting, and so was she. The days grew longer, and the air grew warmer, yet inside Pandora something restless continued to take shape. Though the world outside remained in bloom, filled with birdsong and golden light, her thoughts were heavy and tangled, like a thread she could no longer unwind. She smiled as she walked beside Epimetheus. She spoke kindly to the animals in the forest. She laughed at the breeze that teased her hair. But inside, deep inside, there was a quiet pulsing ache, a question that refused to let go. The box, it was always near, always silent, always watching. Though it had no eyes, no mouth, no voice, it spoke to her more clearly than anyone else could. Its presence filled the air like perfume, soft, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. It was as if a part of her soul had been locked inside it, and the rest of her was aching to be whole again. She had begun to imagine it was breathing. Not in the way living things breathe with lungs and air, but in the way the ocean does, pulling her thoughts in, letting them drift back out. Sometimes it felt like the box sighed when she walked by. Other times she thought she heard a hum, a barely audible vibration, like a whisper just beyond the edge of hearing. Pandora told herself she was imagining things, that it was only the wind, that the box was just a box, but even as she said it, she didn't believe it, because the box felt alive. More than that, it felt aware. And as much as she tried to go about her daily life, the box was always there. If she was weaving, she would lose track of the pattern, her fingers slowing as her mind wandered back to it. If she was tending the garden, she would find herself staring at the sky, wondering what secrets might lie hidden beneath that sealed lid. The curiosity wasn't loud or sharp. It was soft, gentle, like water wearing away at stone. Every day she thought of a new possibility. Perhaps the gods had locked away something dangerous, a beast maybe, or a great fire. Or maybe it was a treasure, something too wonderful for mortals to possess. Maybe, just maybe, it was a gift meant only to be opened when the time was right, and no one had ever told her when that time would be. She had tried to distract herself. She took long walks into the woods, further than usual, where the trees grew older and the shadows fell more deeply. She listened to the rustling leaves, trying to hear guidance in their soft murmurs. But even there, in the heart of the forest, she couldn't escape the pull. And then the dreams began. They were strange and vivid, like messages sent through silk and moonlight. In the dreams, she stood before the box, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. She would lift the lid and light would spill out. Sometimes the light would become music, sometimes it would become voices, sorrowful, pleading, filled with longing. She would always wake up before seeing the end, her heart racing, her palms damp with sweat. She never spoke of these dreams to Epimetheus. He seemed content, blissfully unaware. When he looked at the box, he saw only what he was told to see, a gift not to be touched. A warning from the gods meant to be obeyed. But Pandora, she could not obey without understanding. She had begun to sit in front of it, just for a few minutes each day. At first, she would simply look at it, tracing the carvings with her eyes, trying to read the silent story written into its surface. Then she began to touch it, lightly, letting her fingers rest on the cool, smooth material. She could feel the tiniest pulse beneath her hand, a rhythm that echoed her own heartbeat. And the more time she spent near it, the more the thoughts grew. What if there were answers inside? What if the gods had hidden something beautiful, something sacred, something meant to be revealed only by someone brave enough to ask? The warning not to open it, was it a test? Was the command meant to be broken? She had been created with curiosity. That was no accident. Each god had given her something essential, and the flame of wonder had been placed in her heart by design. Could they truly expect her to ignore it? Could they give her a mind like a river and tell her not to flow? Some days she would whisper to the box, just a few quiet words, not full sentences, more like feelings, the kind of speech that doesn't need language. She would sit beside it in the late afternoon light, her hands folded, her eyes half closed, and speak to it not with her voice, but with her longing. If the box could answer, it never did in words. But it seemed to listen, always to listen. Her restlessness deepened. She no longer felt fully present in the world. Every sound around her, the rustling of leaves, the trickling of streams, even the laughter of birds, seemed to echo her thoughts. Everything was beginning to feel like a question, a soft, endless question. Why? Why not open it? Why not no? And yet something inside her hesitated. There was fear, yes, but not fear of punishment. Not even fear of the gods. It was something more subtle, a sense that once she opened it, everything would change, that she would not be able to close the lid again, not just literally, but spiritually, that something would be lost, something innocent, something that could never be regained. Still she hovered at the edge, not deciding, not yet, just listening, waiting. And as she waited, the box waited too. Silent, patient, certain that its time would come. It happened on a day like any other. The sky was clear, painted in soft blue hues, and the gentle wind carried the scent of blooming flowers through the valley. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, and the world, for all appearances, was calm and undisturbed. But something was different inside Pandora. The stillness of the world only made her internal unrest more unbearable. There was no storm in the heavens, but there was a quiet, churning storm inside her chest. It had been building for days, weeks, perhaps even since the moment she first saw the box. She hadn't planned to open it. There had been no decisive moment, no declaration in her mind. It was not the result of rage or despair or defiance. It was something far more delicate and tragic. It was the slow unravelling of resistance. A whispering erosion of boundaries. The question that had grown so out in her mind finally became a movement in her body. She was alone in the house. Epimetheus had gone to fetch water from a nearby spring, and his absence left the air still. The quiet made the thoughts louder, the pull stronger. Pandora walked across the room as if in a dream. Her feet moved without command. Her hand reached out before she fully realized it. There, on the shelf, the box waited, unchanged, unmoved, but undeniably alive in her imagination. She stood before it for a long time, her fingers hovering just above the carved lid. She could feel the space between her skin and the surface, like a charged current, humming faintly. Her breath slowed. The room felt distant. Time itself began to blur. She whispered to it again, just as she had in the days before, but this time there were words. "What are you?" she said softly, her voice almost trembling. "Why were you given to me?" There was no answer, only silence. But it was not a comforting silence. It was a waiting silence, a silence filled with breathless anticipation. Pandora's heart beat faster. She could feel the blood pulsing in her temples, the heat rising in her chest. Her fingers traced the edge of the lid. Her mind still screamed for caution, but her body was already betraying it. The thought rose again, the same thought that had returned to her every day. How can it be wrong to want to know? And in that moment, in that fragile, suspended breath of time, she lifted the lid. It opened slowly, almost reluctantly, as if resisting at first, then giving way all at once like a sigh held too long. A faint gust of air escaped, dry and cold, and the shadows in the room seemed to shift. What emerged next was not light, not fire, not music. It was something much more terrible and far more subtle. It began with a sound, a low, mournful cry, then a rush of wind, though the windows were shut, and then they began to pour out. Shapes, not solid, not ghostly, but something in between. They slithered and twisted, dancing in the air like smoke with minds of their own. Shadows of sorrow, pain, and despair. Each had a name, though Pandora didn't yet know them. Grief, sickness, rage, envy, loneliness, hunger. They circled her, brushing against her skin like cold fingers. They flew toward the door, toward the windows, toward the world beyond. And they did not look back. They scattered into the sky, vanishing into the winds, sinking into the roots of trees, hiding in the corners of homes and hearts. They were not loud or violent. They were soft, like seas riding the air. But their weight was enormous. They would take root wherever they landed. In time, they would grow. Pandora staggered back from the box, the lid falling from her hands, her chest rising and falling with shallow, panicked breaths. Her eyes were wide with horror, her mind reeling from what she had just seen, what she had released. She fell to her knees. Her hands trembled as she reached for the box again, hoping, praying, that she could shut it before anything more escaped. But as she looked inside, she realized something strange. The box was not empty. Inside, in the deepest corner, something remained. It was small, barely visible. It did not rush out like the others had. It hovered there, quiet and glowing faintly, not dark like the rest. It shimmered, almost timidly, like the last flame of a candle. It was hope. It did not move, but seemed uncertain, as if it too had been changed by what had come before. Pandora reached for it, her hand slow and reverent. And as her fingers touched the inside of the box, hope stirred. It did not escape like the others. It rose gently, and then settled in her hands like a feather. She felt it in her skin, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the coldness the shadows had left behind. It was not strong, it was not a cure for the thing she had unleashed, but it was something, a quiet light in the ruins. She closed the box then, slowly, carefully. The lid fit snugly again, but the damage had been done. The world outside would never be the same. She sat there for a long time, the box beside her, hope flickering gently in her palms. She did not cry, she did not scream, there was no need. She had done what she had always been meant to do, and deep down she understood that now. The box had been a gift, a test, a prophecy. And the moment she opened it, without rage, without malice, she had fulfilled her role in the oldest story of all, the story of suffering and the fragile, impossible miracle that follows it. For a long time Pandora did not move. She remained kneeling on the floor, her hands resting lightly on the sealed box, her eyes unfocused, staring at nothing and everything all at once. The air around her felt different now, emptier, as though the room itself had lost something vital. The warmth that had once filled their home had vanished, replaced by a lingering chill that clung to the walls and whispered through the cracks. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was haunted. Everything had changed in the span of a few breaths, and yet not everything was gone. Pandora slowly turned her gaze toward the object still cradled gently in her hands. It shimmered faintly, pulsing with a warmth that felt nothing like the chaos she had just unleashed. This light, this flicker of something softer, seemed to breathe in harmony with her own chest, rising and falling, fragile but alive. It was hope. Not a word, not a voice, not a promise, just a presence. Hope had not rushed out with the others. It had remained hidden in the deepest part of the box, watching. Perhaps it had been afraid, or perhaps it knew it was not ready, or maybe it had always meant to wait until all the others had gone, so it could arrive when it was most needed. And now it was here. Pandora held it carefully, unsure of what to do. It didn't speak, but it made her feel things she couldn't name, like warmth in the chest after a long cry, or the way dawn touches the sky after a night that felt endless. She felt it settle inside her, not as a cure, not as a fix, but as a presence that whispered, "Not all is lost." For a long time she sat like that, alone but not entirely alone, mourning what had escaped while marvelling at what had remained. Outside, the world was beginning to shift. The shadows that had flown from the box had scattered like seeds in the wind. Already far beyond what Pandora could see, sorrow had begun to take root in hearts across the earth. People would begin to feel strange new emotions: fear, despair, anger. They would encounter pain where there had been none before, sickness where once there was only health. Hunger would arrive, and grief and conflict, but they would also find, in places they did not expect, tiny glimmers of resistance. A mother would cradle her sick child and sing to them despite the fear. A traveller lost in a storm would press forward despite the cold. A farmer, whose crops had failed, would plant again in spring, even though he wasn't sure the soil would welcome the seeds. These quiet acts of courage, of trying again when everything seemed lost, were hope at work. Pandora did not know this yet. She did not know the full extent of what she had released, nor the full strength of what she had saved. But deep inside she felt something shift. The same curiosity that had once driven her to the box now returned, not as a question of danger, but of healing. What did it mean? That hope remained? Was it a mistake? An afterthought? Or was it a sign that even in the presence of darkness, light is never fully extinguished? She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady, her hand still cradling that invisible warmth. She walked to the window and looked out at the hills. The sky had grown darker, though the sun still shone through the clouds in soft silver beams. The wind moved gently through the grass, and far off she could hear the rustling of trees, an ancient sound, constant and forgiving. Pandora closed her eyes. She felt the weight of her choice. Heavy, yes, but not unbearable. She had done what could not be undone. She had opened the box, she had let suffering into the world, but she had also found in its depths the one thing that made the suffering bearable. The one thing that could soften the hardest pain, mend the deepest wound, and remind the human heart why it beats at all. Hope did not promise that things would always be easy, but it promised that life would still be worth living. She understood now that the box was never meant to be a punishment in the way she had feared. It was not simply a trap, it was a mirror, a reflection of what it means to be alive. That for every sorrow there is a struggle, and within every struggle there is the possibility of grace. She turned back to the box and ran her fingers over its carvings once more. It was closed now, firmly sealed, but she no longer feared it. She no longer saw it as a burden. She saw it for what it truly was, a beginning, not of perfection, but of possibility. Pandora picked up the box, lighter now in her hands, and set it gently back in its place. She breathed in deeply, feeling the air fill her lungs like a new kind of courage. Then she stepped outside into a world that was no longer innocent, but was still full of wonder. Behind her, the box sat quietly once more, and inside it, still glowing softly, Hope kept its silent watch. Hope was not like the others. It had not screamed as it left the box. It had not twisted itself into the sky like a curse or a storm. It did not claw or sting or race to scatter. It had waited quietly in the deepest corner, nestled like a seed buried in darkness. When all else had fled, when pain and fear and sickness had taken flight into the world, Hope had remained. Pandora did not understand why. Not at first. She had expected the box to be empty once the lid was flung open. She had thought in her panic that everything within had escaped, and perhaps that would have made sense. Perhaps it would have confirmed what she feared most, that she had made an unforgivable mistake, that she had been nothing more than the unwitting vessel of divine punishment. But it wasn't empty. Inside, tucked beneath the shadows that had once crowded it, was something entirely different. Not terrible, not cruel, but soft and strange and deeply still. Hope. It did not look like anything she could name. Not a flame nor a light, not a voice nor a being. It was presence more than shape, feeling more than form. It lived in the hush that followed sorrow, in the breath after a sob. It shimmered, faint and fragile, yet unmoving. As if it had always known its moment would come, not at the beginning of the storm, but at the end, when all seemed lost. And now, cradled in Pandora's hands, it pulsed gently like a heartbeat. She could not stop looking at it. It didn't speak, but it made her feel known, seen in a way nothing else ever had. It didn't erase what had happened, didn't undo the pain or the regret, but it offered something else, something deeper, a reason to continue. Hope was not loud. It did not rise up with the force of thunder or demand to be noticed. It was easy to miss, easy to dismiss. In fact, many who encountered it in the world beyond would not recognize it for what it was. It might come disguised as a faint smile after days of sorrow, as the courage to try again when all signs point to failure, as the quiet belief that tomorrow might be different. Hope does not argue. It does not need to win. It simply remains. That is its power. And as Pandora stood at the doorway of her home, the world no longer the same, she felt that power begin to settle into her bones. She had seen the darkness, she had unleashed it, but she had also touched the thing that could stand beside it, not to destroy it, but to soften it, to light a candle in its presence. That was what hope was, not the absence of suffering, but the companion to it. It did not deny fear, it walked with it. It did not erase pain, it endured it, and in doing so it offered something more enduring than certainty, meaning. For in the end, hope is not about guaranteeing a happy ending. It is about allowing the possibility that the story is not over, that the next page has not yet been written, that even in the ruins, something can still grow. And so, as the days passed, Pandora came to understand her gift. She began to see it not as a curse, but as a mirror of life itself. The box had held all the sorrows of the world, yes, but at the very bottom, beneath them all, had been the thing that made living with sorrow possible. When sickness would visit a home, hope would follow silently behind. When war and hatred tore people apart, hope would wait patiently in the hearts of those who still dreamed of peace. When the cold of grief wrapped around a soul, hope would press gently against the heart, reminding it to beat again. And sometimes it would appear in the smallest ways, in the planting of a single seed, the writing of a letter, the sound of a lullaby in the dark. Hope had many forms, none of them loud, but all of them enduring. Pandora took this lesson with her. She became quiet, more thoughtful, more attentive to the world around her. When Epimetheus returned and saw the change in her eyes, he knew something had happened, but she didn't try to explain. Some truths could not be spoken. They could only be lived. And as she moved through the days, she began to notice things she hadn't before. The way the light shifted through the trees, the warmth of the water over her fingers, the tender way an injured bird tried to fly again. There was sorrow, yes. She could feel it in the wind, in the earth, in the people. But there was also something else, woven through everything like a golden thread. It was fragile, but it was everywhere. And though the world would never again be untouched, never again be free of struggle, it would never be without this quiet companion either. Hope had remained, and because of that, so would she. Why did Pandora open the box? That question has echoed through the centuries like a riddle wrapped in shadow and light. Philosophers have pondered it, poets have mourned it, and storytellers have returned to it again and again. Was it a mistake? A moment of weakness? A flaw placed within her by the gods? Or was it something else, something deeper, more essential, more human? The gods gave Pandora everything. Beauty beyond compare, intelligence, grace, a voice that could charm the winds and soothe the beasts. But most of all, they gave her curiosity. Not as an afterthought, not as an accident, but deliberately. Hermes wove it into her like thread in a tapestry. Athena sharpened it into her mind like a blade made gentle. The gods knew exactly what they were doing. They created a being of wonder. And they placed before her a mystery, a sealed vessel, a single instruction. Do not open it. It was never a fair request. Telling a mind filled with questions not to seek answers is like telling a flame not to burn, like telling the ocean not to rise with the moon. Pandora did not open the box out of evil or pride or rebellion. She opened it because she was alive, because to live is to wonder, to reach, to open the door even when you've been told not to. She was not a villain. She was the first human soul brave enough to ask the forbidden question, and perhaps that was the point all along, for what was the box, really? Was it a prison for humanity's future suffering? Or was it a gift wrapped in contradiction, a divine challenge hidden in plain sight? Perhaps the gods, in their wisdom or cruelty, or both, knew that the greatest truths are never handed over. They must be discovered, and sometimes discovery begins with disobedience. When Pandora opened the box, the world was changed, not because it became worse, but because it became real. Before, the world had been a still painting, untouched by the brushstrokes of time and grief. But when the box was opened, that painting came alive. It breathed, it wept, it hoped, and in doing so it became human. What is life without sorrow? Without struggle? Without death and the aching beauty of love that knows it must one day end? These are the things that give weight to joy, meaning to peace, depth to laughter. Without darkness, we cannot see the stars. Without wounds, we cannot know healing. Without grief, we do not understand what it means to cherish something truly. Pandora opened the box because she was meant to, because the gods had written her story in such a way that the only path forward was through curiosity and consequence. And from that moment onward, she carried the burden not just of what had been unleashed, but of the misunderstanding that would follow her name for generations. She became a symbol not of weakness, but of awakening. The box itself was never evil. It simply held what the world would need to understand itself fully. It was filled with suffering, yes, but also with wisdom, experience, shadow and reflection. Without it, humanity would remain half-formed, sheltered but shallow, safe but sleeping. It was hope that made it whole, hope buried at the bottom, waiting for everything else to fall away. Hope was not an accident either. It was the final message, the quiet answer to the riddle. The thing that made the opening of the box not a tragedy, but a transformation, a threshold crossed, a beginning not an ending. Perhaps, in the end, the real question is not why Pandora opened the box, but why she had to. Because in doing so she gave humanity its story, a story not of perfection, but of perseverance, not of eternal peace, but of eternal possibility. She became the first to ask what lies beyond the warning, what happens if I try? And because of that we learn to ask too, to face the unknown, to open the sealed doors of our own hearts no matter what may lie inside, to suffer, to endure, to hope, and to begin again.